I am recording. So yeah, I will have just said incredibly nice things about you, by the way.
Okay, awesome.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And so I would love to kind of hear a little bit. First of all, you're in Utah, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I'm in Highland.
Highland. So I grew up there. Did you grow up there? High school?
I grew up in Sugar House.
So what high school did you go to, Brannon?
Highland High School.
Highland. All right. I was an Alta Hawk.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah, yeah. But I think I'm probably old enough to be your dad, so I don't know if that's.
I doubt it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I would love to get and first of all, I'm a big fan of your podcast, and I feel like it's one of those things where I kept having people ask me if I had heard about your podcast, to the point of where at first I was a little bit annoyed. You know, I was saying I would be like, "Hey, I got a podcast too," you know, but I'm like, "Okay, fine. I'll listen to Brandon's podcast," and then it's like, "Okay, I'm kind of hooked now." So podcast is The Betrayed, The Addicted, and The Expert. How long have you done the podcast, and what led to that?
We've done that for 2.5 years. And it was really interesting how it started. I met Ashlynn and Coby. They were just starting off in their recovery journey, and they had done a video that went viral about their story. And they're just really open. And I had been treating betrayal trauma for a while, but maybe 8 years by then.
Oh wow!
And I had worked under people. I had worked at so many different places. I knew what worked and what didn't work. And I could see it working with Ashlynn and Coby. And I just thought, man, we need to come together, and I can bring my expertise and talk about recovery and what really works for healing for a couple. And through them, they can share their story, so people will connect to that, really relate to it. And we didn't know what we were doing. We had a little snowball mic on an ironing board, and we started that way. And really, we didn't need fancy technology and stuff. The story held its own. And we hear things like, you know, your podcast has been one of the most instrumental things for our recovery. And
well, I like what you say too. When you're talking about, you saw their video, and did you recognize things that they weren't doing that would really help in their recovery?
Yeah. So it's interesting when I talk to Ashlynn and Coby, because I'm not their therapist.
Okay.
Which I think is a good thing. I'm actually really good friends with their therapist. But as we talked, I could tell early on they were learning stuff from what I was saying as well.
Okay.
It just goes to show, you know, recovery it's not a thing where you arrive one day. And you know, they were further along than a lot of couples. They were out of the crisis mode. They were moving forward in terms of connection and intimacy.
Yeah.
But they still have some work to go. And so, yeah, they'll always have work to go. Yeah. And so, yeah, they were learning a lot from me, and we kind of capture that on the podcast. You
guys talk about difficult subjects too, and I'm really curious. I want to kind of get to the betrayal trauma part, but is that hard, or do you guys have planning meetings of, okay, do we want to touch this one, or is anything off limits, or are you excited about the difficult topics?
So we want the difficult topics. We gravitate toward that. We really try hard not to plan too much, and the reason is because we're all about authenticity and vulnerability, and so we don't have it scripted out. It really is a conversation. We throw a topic out there, and we just break it down. There's some interesting topics that we hit, and we've gotten some backlash.
Okay, like what? Yeah,
I'd love to talk about. So I think there's a battle within a battle when it comes to betrayal trauma.
Okay.
And if I can give you just a little history.
Please do. That would be great.
So there is, so when I first started treating this years ago, it was this codependency model. You know, the co-addict, and it really felt blamey toward the spouse. And so Barbara Steffens came out with her book, Your Sexually Addicted Spouse, which was really important. And then just a wave started happening of, we're not going to call it codependency. That's not what it is. It is betrayal trauma. And I really appreciated that, because it took the blame away from the spouse. But there's another side to it, and it's gone to this place of, there's betrayal trauma, and then there's this abusive, horrible monster addict, right? And what's interesting, Tony? I've been called a man hater, and I've been called somebody who doesn't sympathize with the betrayed, and I'm neither.
Yeah.
I think we can have compassion for both sides. And so when Ashlynn and Coby and I talk about things like, we did an episode about, what do you attract to your life, right? Like the law of attraction.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of backlash about that one, because they were like, and we were talking about the betrayed, and we were saying, we want you to self-reflect, to really look at how have you attracted certain things into your life. And we're not blaming the betrayed, but what we do want is to empower them to really move forward with the power that they have, and not just stay stuck in a victim place of, I've been hurt, I've been betrayed. That pain is real, that the hurt is real, the betrayal is real. But, and it's kind of like, I was running a group, and this woman I'd worked with for a long time, and I had a lot of rapport with her, and she said, well, am I just supposed to forgive my husband? And I said, well, you could, if and I realized forgiveness isn't something I throw out there so quickly.
Yeah.
I said you could, that's up to you. And she said, well, he did all these things to me, and I'm just expected to forgive him. And I said, look, I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't do, but if you want more peace and happiness, and you want to move forward, then that's up to you, and that's your responsibility to figure out how to forgive him.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's some therapists, there's some platforms out there that really drive home, stay the victim if you're the betrayed, and consider him a monster as the addict.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help a couple move forward. I did this, I know I'm going off, Tony. I did this Instagram.
No, I like it. Yeah.
I did this Instagram post on positive regard toward your spouse. And I was quoting Brené Brown and saying, like, look, the life you bless the most when you have positive regard toward other people is your own. And I got all these, it was interesting because on my Instagram, I have a lot of people who follow me because of betrayal trauma.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of people who follow me just because they like the relationship stuff that I do. And the people who don't have the betrayal trauma, they thought, that's awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that positive regard post. The people who have been indoctrinated, I'm not saying everybody with betrayal trauma, the people who've been indoctrinated with, he's just a monster, hated that post. And they said, that's really dangerous for you to say, to have positive regard toward my spouse. And my response to that was, I'm not going to back down. Positive regard toward your spouse is a good thing. It doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries with him.
Yes.
Right? It doesn't mean that you're at risk of getting hurt more. So yes, you can approach your recovery and your recovery with your relationship from a place of compassion for yourself, first and foremost, have your own boundaries, and then for your partner. And that's what actually works for healing for a couple. So,
because do you feel like when people, the betrayed in that example, do you feel like the fear is that if I then give him positive regard, or I say, okay, I forgive you, I mean, what I hear often is then the betrayed feels like, okay, so now he's off the hook, and he will go back to doing whatever he was doing, and all of this was for nothing, and it doesn't matter anymore. Do you hear that? And
it comes down to the fundamentals of real recovery, which is Because absolutely, Tony, what you just said is the fear. Like if I don't control this through my anger and
Yes.
my fear here, then I'm worried that I'm going to get hurt again.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you know, I get this question like, how do I know when he's in recovery? And I just say, you know it.
Mm.
He, you know, if you let him off the hook, he still needs to man up and work his own recovery. He still needs to create that trust with you, and your anger and your fear in no way is driving that recovery.
Okay.
What needs to drive that recovery is his internal motivation for change, and that's what will get him into solid recovery. And when you know that that's there, then you can really back off of that anger and that fear. That anger and that fear, it's interesting, Tony, because I don't want to say you shouldn't have it.
Right.
Because what I do want to say from anyone who's been betrayed is having it is totally normal and valid, and anybody would have those feelings. But what I hope that whoever's listening can understand is, having it is something you need to process and work through and learn from and solidify your own self, so that you can become stronger. It's not something that works to turn into force for his recovery.
Yeah. Yeah.
So does that make sense?
Oh, it's so good. And I mean, because I do feel like I mean, I want to hear you more. I feel like I want to echo, but I feel like I often say that, and I'm a big fan of acceptance and commitment therapy, and that acceptance part is all of the situations in your life that brought you to that moment caused you to feel the way you feel. And if you didn't feel that way, then there would be something kind of off. And so perfectly okay to feel that way.
Absolutely. I always say, don't shoot on your feelings.
Yeah.
Every emotion is valid. Every single emotion that any person has ever had in this universe is valid.
Yeah.
Because it's real to them. And so absolutely. And the first stages of recovery for somebody who's been betrayed, if they've been isolated and alone in those feelings,
Mm-hmm.
it's really important that somebody says, we get it, and it's okay that you feel that way.
Yeah.
So
where do you kind of I mean, I like where you're going with the kind of talk more about what do you do when you kind of go fundamentals of betrayal trauma, or when you have somebody that comes in for the first time, or are there some things that somebody's going to be listening right now, they've heard the term, they aren't doing anything about it? What do you say? Yeah.
So first thing is what I just said is to let them know that what they're feeling is okay, to validate it. And validation comes through empathy from the therapist part. It also comes through education. When you educate them and they're like, oh my gosh, that's us, that's me, that's yes. And so, education, empathy. Also, validation comes from support from other people. So things like group. I'm a huge believer in group, especially for the betrayed, and the addicted, but both.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing. So through that education, then we start to really outline what real recovery is. And what's interesting, Tony, is most people come in and they think, he's acting out with pornography and masturbation, or he's had an affair, whatever it is, and that behavior needs to stop. So we need to stop that behavior. And we dig in, and there's symptoms like acting out everywhere, but there's roots to that. There's real problems there. And the women who decide to work their own recovery, they go through a process of self-discovery and change and healing unlike any other. And what they realize is that his addiction really has propelled them, and it's a huge blessing in their life. They learn how to rework their relationship with God.
Okay.
They learn how to really know who they are, have healthy boundaries, learn how to be authentic, learn how to deal with conflict. They learn how to be empowered in doing what they want to do with their life and be more honest. And so, and why do they learn all this? Because he had an addiction. Because the best way that they can protect themselves is by being as healthy as they possibly can be. And so, Sandy, I'm talking. Sorry, that was my daughter, Tony.
That's right. Well, and I feel like that's that part where, and I've said this in with couples therapy as well a lot, where, you know, you can't wait almost to get to that point where no one ever wants something like betrayal trauma to be in their marriage. But then at the end, it is almost hard to say, man, aren't you in a better spot now? Yeah.
And you know what? It doesn't require both people working recovery for that to happen. Some of my divorced women would say that very thing. You know, their work led them to their divorce. But their divorce was a result of them getting healthy. And it's awesome when both people work their recovery and they're both equally committed to their own individual recovery. And then the relationship just thrives. The intimacy becomes so much more than it ever was because they're both getting so healthy.
Yeah. Before we get too far off of the support too, can I just ask you your theory or your opinion on, because I love when people, they find a group and they get their individual help, but I do kind of refer to what I just call the peanut gallery. I mean, do you find that they go to a friend and then the friends are giving this, you know, here's what you need to do kind of advice? Do you see that, and what do you do with that?
Yeah. So there's difference between good support and bad support. And that, you know, one of the main differences is bad support will feed and fuel a victim mentality.
Okay.
And they'll fuel, they'll encourage you to stay stuck. And so, but it feels supportive because it feels so validating. Oh man, yes. Yeah, you get me, and yeah, he sucks and he's horrible, and I'm just stuck, and this is awful. And good support will totally empathize, hear you out, reflect back your emotions, explore them with you, allow you to feel what you're feeling. But good support will also be honest with you, and push you and hold you accountable, and care about you moving forward. And so some groups you go to can be really detrimental if they feed that victim mentality. Some groups can be really awesome if they are honest with you and will push you to move forward. So yeah, that definitely exists, Tony, the peanut gallery thing. Absolutely.
So do you find that most of the people that you work with are people where the addict is willing to be a part of the treatment? Or do you find that you're seeing a lot of people where the addict is, hey, you can go get help, but I told you I'm not going to do it anymore?
I'd say, just off the top of my head, I'd say about 70% the addict is willing to engage in treatment as well. Now, there's a difference between, I guess, let's talk about willingness.
Okay.
Sometimes that's compliance, and that's really destructive to the relationship.
Okay.
What that is I'll go because you want me to go. I'm only here for you. My heart's not in this. I'm just trying to avoid you leaving me, so I'll go. As compared to, I'm going because I'm into this. I'm healing. I'm proactive in my own recovery. And so I'd say maybe 50%. Okay. But it goes both ways. I have some couples I work with where he's totally engaged and she's resistant. Yeah. She doesn't want to move forward, which sounds crazy. Mm-hmm. But it's just such hard work, and there's a lot to face. And so she's caught up in fear and blame, and she doesn't want to work moving forward. So I see both sides of it.
Yeah. Do you feel like in those scenarios that one you just described, when there comes the disclosure, DDay, the moment where she finds out, there's such that shock that it's, look, this isn't my problem. This is your problem. Why would I need to do anything about it? Do you run into that?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, there's some truth to that. But it's one of those things, if somebody took a sledgehammer to my leg, like they did that, they need to fix that. But now I'm stuck with a shattered leg, and so I'm going to need to do some rehab on that leg. But yes, I hear that all the time. I also, when I run betrayal trauma groups for the first time, sometimes women will come in really eager and ready to go, like, yes, I'm ready for this. A lot of times they'll come in, and before I even say a word, they'll start crying or be really emotional. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm here. I can't believe that this is what our marriage has come to. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's that they want to stay in hiding because it's a hard thing to face. And I tell them when they're there, like, good for you. It took so much courage for you to come today. And then I kind of, I make it safe for them there. So, but absolutely, it's hard for them to engage sometimes.
Do you think that some of the fears are around, they don't want to hear that their spouse try to blame them, maybe the addict, or they don't want to hear that they were, I don't know, whatever's going to come out. Him saying you were missing signals, or I felt you were withdrawn, or that. Do you feel like that could be a problem?
Well, sometimes, Tony, and the truth is a lot of the women have been to therapists or church leaders, or really do push back the blame onto them.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear that anymore. They're told that they haven't had sex enough, or they've been a bad life, and they're like, that's the last thing I need from a professional or somebody who's that I don't trust help. And so why would I go get help? I'm
going to isolate that audio clip. That one has got to be played over and over, because I feel like nothing is more detrimental than having someone come into my office and you do sense that hesitation, and you find out that they have sat with a bishop or someone that said, well, what was your role in it? Or how often were you having sex? Or, and it just, that's the part where I want to like pause the session, go find
a really bad horror story. It was like 2 weeks after DDay. This bishop was talking to this couple, and he turns to her and he says, hey, have you forgiven him?
2 weeks.
He was 2 weeks. He says, no. And he says, well, then I'm going to need your temple recommend.
For her? For her? Oh.
That's an extreme example.
Right?
But stuff like that, like, come on. And so, they're a little reticent to come in and have somebody tell them what is, and tell them,
I like what you're saying, though. So I feel like that speaks to, and I love that people are going to hear this and they're going to resonate. And they're going to say, okay, I don't know. He told me he's not going to do it anymore. I'm probably okay. I'm listening to a couple podcasts and I'm good. But what do you say to that? And I totally want to meet the client where they're at. Don't get me wrong.
Absolutely.
But what do you say to the people listening right now that kind of feel like, okay, good advice, noted, but I think I'm okay.
Right. Well, and again, if that's where you're at, that's where you're at. And at least you're listening to this, and
yes,
awesome. Right. But such a crucial part of recovery is connection.
Okay.
And it's just so powerful when you can connect with other people who are in your similar situation. And I think the reason why it's so powerful is because it takes so much shame, resiliency, and vulnerability to go out and do that. You get a benefit from it. And so connection and education are really important. And so you can get your education, kind of behind the curtain, so to speak.
Yeah.
But connection, you got to put yourself out there a little bit. And so I would highly encourage that. Yes, you do go to a group, you meet with a therapist, you find a mentor, a sponsor, somebody that you can talk openly with about where you're at. So,
and again, somebody that knows what betrayal trauma is, not somebody that says, no, I'm sure I can figure it out, or I'll Google it, or
absolutely somebody who really understands betrayal trauma.
Yeah. Now I feel bad because I feel like we're about to jump. Now I have a zillion questions. So are you okay if we call this the all over the map section? Because
that's great, Tony.
Okay, good. So because a couple of things you said, and I was going to frame this with here's a hard question, but it's like, I don't know, Brannon, you're a pro, so I don't even have to. These are layups for you, I'm sure. But do you have advice for DDay, for disclosure, and I'll frame it very quickly with, I will have people that will, they get caught, or they finally decide, okay, I'm going to tell my spouse that I'm addicted or I've had an affair, and they maybe Google it and it just says, hey, just tell them everything. And so then they go in and they're like, I'm going to be open about everything. And then it just causes this concept of staggered disclosure. The guy feels so relieved that he confessed. Or, do you have advice? What do you say about that disclosure?
Yeah, a couple things. So and there's a difference between DDay and like a formal disclosure.
Yes. Okay. Talk about that.
So DDay is when it just busts open. She finds something. It's like yesterday I was meeting with, not yesterday, recently I met with somebody and they found condoms in the back seat of his truck, and it just like led to this conversation, to that, to like, boom, all of a sudden her whole world was different. Right. That's DDay. A formal disclosure is when you sit down and you lay things on the table and it's a chance to just kind of flush it all out. And so if I were in the position of having a big thing to tell my spouse and knowing that it needs to be disclosed, this might sound a little weird, but I would go to a therapist first.
Sure.
I'd get some guidance, talk through some things. The way you disclose is really important, and you can do so much damage to the foundation and the trust in your marriage, not because of the act.
Right.
Now, the act itself did damage, yes. But the way that you come out with it, and this staggered disclosure, this trickle out effect, justifying it, rationalizing it, minimizing it in any way, it creates this thing where she feels like, well, thanks for telling me, but now I just don't know what I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and I'm going to think about it, and I'm going to ask more questions. And then if you weren't consistent with your story, then you must be lying. And now how do I trust you on anything?
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. And yeah, exactly. And the thing is the natural thinking, I think, for most people is this: I'm going to tell her enough so she thinks I'm being honest, but not too much because it's too uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And this is really tricky, and this is why working with a therapist is important, because the other side of it is telling her every last detail is also not good. And so then it's like, well, are you telling me that there's a difference between telling her what happened, you can say, yeah, I've looked at pornography 5 days a week for the last 2 years. Okay. That's one thing. You going and saying, I've looked at pornography with this type of woman and this size and this hair color, and now you're just planting so many triggers in her head, right? I've had an affair is different than I met with this woman at this restaurant and we ate this meal, and now you're just planting triggers in her head. So don't avoid scary, hard things, but also don't overdo it and plant a bunch of triggers in her head, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I love it. And I'll kind of, it's funny that you say this, and I would love to spend some time on triggers and the whole kind of PTSD symptoms and that's something. But, I met with somebody recently who it was a guy who was struggling with marriage and thinking of divorce and that sort of thing. And then in that one, of course, I say, go meet with a divorce attorney and get all of your data and have questions and, get everything together before you present this as, I want the divorce. So I kind of like what you're saying. We need to get that in our field of, hey, go meet with a therapist and have a list of questions and have your game plan. And it's not from because I want to manipulate her but it's, I care about her and I want to do this right.
Absolutely. I love that, Tony. The thing is, it's not to manipulate her. It's for you to gather information because you care about her.
Yeah. Because I like what you're saying. I mean, it comes from a great place when a guy finally does say, okay, fine, I'll tell her everything. But, and this is what I love about your podcast, because you guys talk about this stuff real. And I do find at times that I'm kind of still on the, I want to have people kind of come to these conclusions and things on their own. And I don't want them to feel like I'm shitting on them but what I love what you're talking about is the one I hear often is objectification, for example. So if a guy is just dumping everything, and I like where you're saying there's these specific triggers and that he's planted, and then I'll hear a woman say, wait, have you ever looked at my friend and thought about her? And then he's like, okay, I just Googled, I got to be super honest. Yes, I have. It's like, what? Have you ever looked at this girl and this one? And then it's like, and now she is living in a world of triggers, and he felt like he was doing the right thing.
Right.
You know,
right.
I don't know if you ever get those.
Well, Tony, here's the thing. This is a hard topic.
Yes.
When I meet with a couple, there's a couple, she would flip through Facebook and pull up pictures of their friends and say, is she attractive? Is she
Right.
attractive? Is she attractive? You're right. And so he came into me and I said, be honest with her. And so he goes and he's like, yeah. That, you know, and so she goes out in their small town and sees all these women and so then he's like, well, that didn't work. And so she does it again. And he's like, no. And so she comes in and is like, he's lying to me. And I said to him, look, be honest with her. And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I was, be honest with her. And he's like, well, I have. I tell her if they're attractive. And what, he's not honest with her. Because the reality is when she's triggered like that,
yes.
You know, his honest truth is, honey, I'm not comfortable with this right now.
Yeah.
This doesn't work for me. I'm happy to be honest with you, but if you could go talk to Brannon, or if we could work through this before we go down the list of attractive women on Facebook,
right.
That's what I want to do. So it's a boundary for him. And now it might look to her like, no, you're just avoiding this then. You're just, and in a way it's true. But if he can own it and step into it and say, look, I care about us. I care about our safety. This isn't something that's healthy for us right now. Instead of being way too compliant,
yes,
or way too avoidant and lying about it, right? He's not going to create safety that way.
I love that, because now I throw my couples hat on and we're really trying to, that's one of those where I say, okay, we got to trust the process a little bit. We got to secure the connection, you know, the old cliche of we got to work on the roots, and then the leaves maybe aren't going to feel as triggering or as heavy. But right now, if we're just picking out those, it's going to be, it's not going to be pretty. Right. So secure up that connection. And then it's kind of like, you know, I don't know, then maybe it's like, yeah, okay, she's cute. And then the wife's like, okay, if you'd have told me not, I would have thought you were nuts, you know, but we're not having that conversation at the beginning. Right.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. It's the example I always give is my wife made this dish and it was like, she spent all day making it. And I was like, she puts it in front of me and I eat it. And she's like, how is it? What am I supposed to do, Tony? Like,
oh, it was a great dish, Brannon, whatever it was. Even if it was tuna fish casserole, man, that was good. Yeah.
Right. And the truth is, so I tell her something like this, like, hon, like, I so appreciate your hard work. Like, I love you. Thank you. It's not my favorite.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't put it on the menu. And you know what? She's a little disappointed.
Sure.
But for me to maintain trust in my relationship with her, I need to be able to tolerate her disappointment. Yeah. I need to be able to have the strength enough to be honest with her. I can still be kind and loving. And so then when she makes dinner the next day, it's like, and it's good. And I'm like, heck yeah, this is amazing. She knows I mean it.
Yes.
It's the same. It's the same thing between a couple, right? Yeah. For him to be able to be authentic and honest about who he is and know who he is, that's what will build trust in the relationship.
Okay, Brannon, I'm very open about my ADD on my podcast. What was that? What was that dish? I'm dying here.
It was chickpea curry.
Oh, I do like a good curry.
Yeah, but it was vegetarian. Just, I don't know. Just
okay.
Had like coconut in it. And
okay. No, all right. But I love that though, because even, and again, back to couples mode, I'm a huge emotionally focused therapy fan, EFT fan, and we do want to be able to share our truths. And I feel like one of those underlying principles is it's okay to have a differing opinion, and our goal is not to destroy the other person's reality. It's, you know,
one of the old, like when I was trained a lot under some people where I learned a lot of what not to do. Uh-huh. And one of the things that I learned was at the beginning of recovery, the addict doesn't have a leg to stand on. He needs to shut up, and he needs to comply, and he needs to not have boundaries. And there couldn't be anything further from the truth. Does the addict need boundaries? Absolutely. Not just for him and his recovery and understanding who he is, but also to rebuild the trust in the relationship. Not being boundaried for him is not being honest. And the last thing she needs is for him not to be honest. And so it's not just hunkering down and just like trying to do everything you possibly can to make her happy. The thing that's going to make her happy is when she feels integrity there, from you, and strength there, right?
And I feel like that's where the individual work becomes so important. I always, when I'm working with men, for example, I mean, I do kind of say, all right, I hear you and I want to hear your truths, but where does that come from? And is it being worked through a manipulation filter? If a guy is being really, really honest, I love to tell the story of having a long day and driving home and feeling down and realizing halfway home that, okay, what's my goal here with this feeling down? And it's like, wow, I want to come home and have everybody go, oh man, Dad, oh, you work so hard. And I was like, I don't want that. I want to bust the door open, everybody, Dad's home, and I'm pumped. So, am I being manipulative, lovingly manipulative, unaware manipulative?
Right. Well, and that's what's so tricky with addiction is, denial, drama, manipulation. It's so automatic and runs so deep that a lot of times, if you've been stuck in your addiction for so long, you don't really know your truth.
Exactly.
Your truth goes through this denial thing, and it's hard to trust it. And that's where a good support system can really help, is to bounce things off of a buddy in recovery or a good therapist who can be like, this really feels manipulative.
Yeah. Right.
Who are you really? What really is your value, your truth here with this thing, right?
Yeah. Okay. Do you mind talking triggers and talk about, do you feel, what is a trigger? Do you encourage, and this one will say the woman is the betrayed, to express triggers? What is the addicted supposed to do with triggers? I mean, I'm this is the part I feel like can get tricky, and I know what I feel is the right thing, but you are the expert. Literally, it says it on your podcast. So I'm excited about this.
Right. So triggers are just anything that triggers your midbrain, your survival response. So triggers an emotion, triggers a behavior to react. So it can be a smell, it can be you see something, an event, something happens, and you go into your emotional mind. You're ready to do something, fight, flight, or freeze. And so with betrayal trauma, it's trauma. They have trauma triggers, and things that aren't really based in reality can end up triggering them like crazy. It's like my buddy in Hawaii. We were blasting off a bunch of fireworks, and he went in and just stuck his head under a pillow and was shaking. And he's a combat veteran who was on the front lines, and so it makes total sense. But if you look at it, it doesn't make much sense. We're just firing off some fireworks, right? He has that trauma response because of his life experiences. So he's going into a survival mode. With betrayal trauma is real. So if you get home 5 minutes late from work and she's freaking out, it makes total sense that she is.
Okay, I love it.
And her triggers are one of the best opportunities for the addict. But if he can see it as that.
Yes.
Because usually he'll take it personally, or he'll be really uncomfortable with it. So when she's triggered, if you can hold space for her, if you can be an asset for her to process through those emotions, if she wants you to, then you become somebody who connects to her in her scariest moments, not somebody who adds on to her scariest moments.
It's an opportunity. I mean, it is an opportunity to connect. I mean, I love what you're saying there. I can't imagine how hard that would be for a guy, but I want the woman to say, all right, I drove by this store, or I saw this girl, or I smelled this smell and I was triggered. Because I want the guy to turn to her and say, thank you.
Yeah. Tell me about it. I want to know how you feel and who you are. And there's little tricks and techniques. We probably won't get into those today, but things that he can do to help her process that trigger. But first and foremost, it takes his own shame resiliency. Yeah. Because that trigger is usually probably about him. Like, why are you a cheater? Why did you do this to me? Why, I was wondering if you're going to hurt me again. Are you? And for him to say, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Or for him not to say, when are you going to get over this? Exactly. How come you turn it? But for him to just be like, oh my gosh, you're freaked out right now.
Yeah.
And I want to hear your pain. I had a good buddy of mine, actually, an old client, good buddy of mine. his wife woke up 3 a.m. and he was on his phone at the end of the bed, and she's triggered. I mean, duh. I think his history is acting out on his phone with pornography. And so she's telling him like, hey, like, what are you doing? And she freaks out. And the old him would have been like, oh my gosh, I've been sober for 2 years. Well, you know, what's wrong with you? Can't you believe? And he just stopped and thought, oh my gosh, I can't imagine with what you've been through, waking up in the middle of the night and seeing me on my phone like this.
Yeah.
Like, geez, like, I bet you're freaked out right now. And that's, you see, you're nodding your head, Tony. That's what you're looking for, is to get them to nod their head. Like, oh yeah, you get me. Yeah, you understand me. And I'm okay to feel this trigger. And that's what will kill the trigger.
Absolutely.
If in that moment he says, you're crazy, or just get over it, or that's not what I was doing, it'll amp that trigger up. Right?
Yeah.
And so
the more, and I always feel like that, you know, in the EFT, Sue Johnson has this attachment injury apology. That you're familiar with those, right? And it's that man, I'm sorry I put you in a spot where you feel that way when you see me at the end of the bed, and I'm sorry for the times that I'm not even aware of that you probably go to that place and wonder and, you know, sit with that, which I know can be so uncomfortable.
Yes, absolutely. So the relationship has a lot of opportunity to heal because of the pain and because of the wounds. And it's a silver lining, I think, that God gave to help repair things. When what I'm saying is, when there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of emotion, which means there's a lot of opportunity for connection.
I like that.
Yeah. And if the addict can see it that way, and learn how to step into that with her, then they'll start to strengthen their bond, and it's a beautiful thing.
Well, you know, I had a client share a quote with me, and I'm drawing a blank right this second on the author, but the end of the quote says, you know, jumping through the abyss and finding out on the other end there's a feather bed. And I feel like that's the concept, right?
That is the concept. Yes.
Yeah.
But Tony, it takes the opposite of what an addict has done his entire life, which is avoid vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
Is to learn how to isolate and disconnect and go into denial. And so it takes the learning how to do the opposite of that will really help her, will help the relationship, and help him strengthen his own recovery.
Yeah. Brandon, do you recommend that women in this scenario express triggers as often as they can, or do you feel like hang on to those? Or
yeah, I do think expressing triggers is a good thing. I would encourage a support system for her. So you might call a sponsor or a group member and just say, hey, I got to surrender something over. And that sponsor might say, yeah, you're really spinning in it. Like, the facts are just this. Let's just stick with the facts. Let's surrender it over to me, and you're good. And as long as she's good, great. But every last little trigger, you know, I've worked with a couple where, you know, they go out in public and they can't even go out in public because it's trigger, right?
Right.
Now, I'm not saying she shouldn't have those triggers, but she needs to have some tools and work through those triggers outside of him sometimes. Because if she's always turning to him to say, you're good, you're safe, you're okay.
Yeah.
Then her safety completely depends on him, which is not.
Yeah. And I like where you go back with that, where that shows the importance of the individual work as well. Because I do feel like if individual work's being done and the point of triggers is to this opportunity for connection, and then I feel like when she gets to the point where she knows, if I bring a trigger to him, I know now he is going to be there for me. He's going to own this. So maybe now it's time for me to kind of do a little mindfulness or work through this. Exactly.
It's interesting because sometimes the men that I work with, or the addicts that I work with, they're like, well, when is she going to do her own work? Right. And what's interesting is when they've done their own work and they focus on them and they learn how to empathize, the light reflects back on her where she's like, oh my gosh, he's there for me. He's honest with me. He's empathetic. Like, this is my stuff now. I got to figure this out. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. We could talk all day. I mean, and I feel so bad. I mean, I feel bad that I have this this time pressure. But I think in the perfect world, though, it's perfect to say, man, if there are questions that we didn't answer today, first, I would love to send them my way, and I would love to see if we could do another episode at some point in the near future.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But even more so, go to your podcast, because I almost guarantee that if you go to your podcast, you guys would probably cover this, because I would love to talk about things like intimacy and talking about sex and all of those kind of things. And I know you have episodes on there about that.
Yeah, like you said, we don't avoid the hard topics,
which is the best.
We just finished Sextember, so we talked about sex all during Sextember.
Okay.
Check us out, The Betrayed, The Addicted, and The Expert.
Yeah.
I
say my new best friend, Brannon, is the expert. You play the role of the expert, which is, and it's an absolute pleasure to talk with you. I mean, I love that we talk about authenticity and stuff. The reason I don't have as much time as I had wanted to is because when we started talking to each other before the recording, I know it was just nice to talk to you. And I feel like we could have talked for days. I mean,
I agree,
and I get that same sense on your podcast, and I think it's very relatable. It's conversational. And so my jealousy has now been replaced with admiration. And so I highly recommend that people go check that out. And I would love to have you again on in the not too distant future.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony.
Okay.
And we'll
Brannon Patrick, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to hit stop here, but hang on a second.